Usually I'll sit here and do one coil, wait a while, do one coil, wait a while.
Sure.
It'll catch up. So now I'm going to go into pinching.
Hey guys, a few days ago I drove to southern Utah to visit John Olsen at his home there. John is the person that's been making prehistoric pottery replicas from the Southwest longer than anybody else I know of. In fact, literally about as long as I've been alive. So I was able to talk to him a little bit about how he got started in primitive pottery, and then he showed us how to make a corrugated pot. So I think you're really going to enjoy this video. You could tell us about how you started in pottery?
I was thinking about that last night, and I think it was somewhere around 1969 or 70 during a deer hunt, and we were pulling a trailer with horses in it, and we were going up this place that we usually hunted, and the trailer slipped off the side and was hanging over the cliff. And the reason it slipped off the side is because we were going through a little clay band, and I kind of messed around with that stuff in my hands and didn't really think much of it. But later on, when I was in high school, I remembered it and went and gathered some of it up, and I made a pot, and I talked to my art teacher to fire it in a kiln, and we ended up, he was kind of worried about it, that it might melt, so we made a bowl for it out of regular clay that he knew would hold up in the kiln. But it came out just great, and it was nice, and so I just started playing around with probably native clays about that time.
I am ready.
Okay, so my first thing is sometimes I'll roll this around and dry it out a little bit, just about a marble size. I'm trying to dry out the clay, but I also wetting up the sandstone.
I see.
So all my corrugated start with a little disc. A lot of times you'll see this little disc broken on the ground. You see the little bottom of a pot circle. I suspect that instead of trying to build on the coil, that they built on a flat surface for the first little bit. I'll start out with just a basic, not pinching, but just kind of a clapboard looking thing. So with that flat disc, the dog hair in there, you have something to build out on. And I'm real critical about the distance between each coil. If you go too big, your pot gets too thin. If you go too tight, your pot gets too thick. It doesn't look right. So usually a tighter coil looks lots better than a far apart one. Most people, when they first start out corrugating, they try to go too fast, make too big a leaps outward. And the best way to do it is keep it in close. I ended up getting a scholarship and going to Dixie College, and I majored in ceramics and art, and my professor, he encouraged me to, and actually the whole class, to look for some native clays so we could use instead of buying clay from factories and stuff like that. So we were out searching around, and we actually found a few clays, and we found a few glazes, and that just kind of piqued my interest, and I started making redware, of all things, because basically we were firing in a kiln, and it was an electric kiln, so it was an oxidizing atmosphere, so it produced nice reds. So I was polishing. I was really into some of the Hopi designs with Thunderbirds and things like that, and I'd polish it up, and yeah, they came out pretty good. Pretty nice. The next coil, usually I like it about a pencil size, and what that'll give you is about 1/4 inch thick on your pot.
Okay.
So when you're first starting out, it's kind of hard to get a rhythm going.
Now at this point, are you thinking about the curvature of your pot at all? Because your disc looks pretty flat.
Not really.
Okay.
It is slightly cupped, but not much. And your clay is very soft. The softer you work your clay, the easier it is to turn it. If your clay is really hard to pinch, you're going to cause hydraulics, and it'll actually cup the other way.
Yeah.
Now at this point in time, sometimes I just let it sit, but I'm just going to keep going.
Let it firm up a little bit before you keep going.
Yeah, it's still pretty small. Usually I'll sit here and do one coil, wait a while, do one coil, wait a while.
Sure.
Eventually I just decided to go further than that, and started trying to replicate stuff from native clay and doing it in a open fire or a pit fire or something like that, and had very few successes. I didn't quite understand the preheat problem as much as I should have, but eventually I got a handle on that, and by the end of the 1970s, probably 78, 79, I started really doing lots of different types of pottery. It hadn't got too much into the black and white. I had, but I was using mineral paints, which wasn't too familiar with organic paints yet. But eventually I moved into organic paints and finding better clay sources than what I had. And then I became interested in corrugated pottery. Some of my first corrugateds are so pathetic. I didn't understand it. I went to the Edges of Cedars Museum and sat in the back room and looked at pottery sherds for hours and hours and hours on end. And so now I'm going to go into pinching. And pinching is all in one move. There's no preparation of the rim. It's basically laying the coil on there. It doesn't have to be right where it's supposed to be, because I can kind of manipulate it back and forth with my thumb. Depending on types of corrugated, you could go in, you can go sideways, you can go flat, you can push back. The thumb does it all. So I'm just going to do the basic standard corrugated. It should pinch out to that sharp edge. And that sharp edge gives you your next place to lay your coil. So there's no coming back and flattening this. There's nothing else to do but just keep adding coils and pinching. Now when you come to your first pinches where you're starting to overlap, there's several ways you can do it. You can pinch right on top of the last ridge, or in between the last ridge, or somewhere. So I'm going to pinch right on top of the last ridge. There's the ridge. That can give you a little bit of a spiraling, or you can go in the middle. It doesn't really matter. Depends on what type of corrugating you're doing. And as you're going out, it's like basketry. You're gonna have to skip one and put two in one spot because it's getting larger.
Sure.
I was actually working out at an airport, and on weekends I'd head home and spend all night long, all weekend long, trying to replicate corrugated pots. And eventually I got to where I could do it pretty good. And it just kind of blossomed from there. Then I went into selling this stuff and producing artifacts for different museums and things like that, and that's kind of brought me to where I am today. You can already see it starting to turn. Just going right on top of those other pinches. Now I'm getting a little wide, so I'm going to put one in the middle and then one on top. So I skipped, but you won't be able to see it. So when you're in high gear on this thing, it's about this fast.
Nice.
You're really moving along really fast. And the whole key here is distances between these lines here. If you can manage that, and that's a visual thing. And if you see, when I push, sometimes my back finger is curling down. And it just depends on where the coil's at. If I feel like I need to push the coil out,
okay,
I can push it out. Like if it's too close, like that, I can actually roll it out.
Nice.
And roll it out and keep it,
yeah,
and then keep it straight. So you're going about a 1/4 inch distance between your coils.
Okay.
And your coil's about a 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little thicker. And that should give you the thickness of about a 1/4 inch. But as you see, the coil does slide forward a little bit each pinch.
Yep.
I don't really sell too much anymore. I give more stuff away than I sell. I'm more interested in exploring other techniques. There's thousands of different types of corrugated. Everyone's unique, and I have an endless supply of projects to do as far as looks and shapes and things like that. On the other hand, I still do some red wares, polychromes, and I still do some black and whites. Not as much as I used to. Probably my heyday was probably 1995, somewhere in there. That was when I was really producing a lot of stuff, and I'd pretty much had a handle on everything that I do today.
Do you sign your pots so that if somebody found an old John Olsen, they could know it was yours?
I used to put some little turkey tracks on them, and then some of them that I did sell to the museums, they required me to put a mark on them or something.
Sure.
So I used to put a LCMP on them, and that stood for Little Creek Mountain Pottery. Lately I haven't signed anything unless somebody really wants it to be signed. That's just a preference for me, because I think that prehistorics didn't sign their stuff, so that we know of, so I don't sign my stuff. But if somebody wants a piece and they want it signed, I'm more than willing to do that. But I know my stuff. Unfortunately, I have seen some things in catalogs that stuff I made 30 years ago has ended up on the black market.
Sure.
And so I was looking through some catalogs that a good friend of mine has, and of a bunch of different pictures of types and different pottery, and I found 3 pots that I had made. And actually I says, you know what, I've got that pot right here at my house, because it's my own design. And I went in and I showed him the design, and it was the same one that was in the catalog. So this is more thumb inward.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Little different.
Yep.
Not much though. But in the long run, it does look different. Okay, now I'm coming up on going to start to overlap the...
Overlap what, where you started that style, or?
Where I started that style.
Uh-huh.
So I'm probably going to try to go right on top of the old one and put a pinch, which is going to leave a deep hole.
Right.
Now my coil's quite high, so I'm actually going to drag it down and pinch.
Nice.
Just a slight little change. Just slight little differences in your thumb adjustment creates a whole different type of corrugated.
If somebody wanted to learn corrugated from you, you take on students?
I do. I mostly teach at 2 gatherings, maybe 3 gatherings. A place called Rabbit Stick, one called Winter Count, and another one called Fire to Fire. I have taught at other ones in California, Buckeye and some other ones, but corrugated is it's a long learning curve for some people. I think we're contaminated with the modern ceramics, like using the wheel and lots of water and things like that. This is a different thing. Corrugating is not stacking coils on top of each other to make it taller or bigger. It's adding to the side that you can pinch up. And that's kind of basically how all prehistoric ceramics were made. They're not stacking coils on top to make the pot taller or higher. They're adding to the side, inside or outside, so that they can pinch taller.
They're layered like shingles.
They're layered like shingles. And if you break a piece of prehistoric pottery, especially a piece of corrugated, you can actually see those striations in them.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And it's pretty cool to look at that. So that gives you an idea, you know, how they were doing it. So they were layering that on there, and it's usually about 2 to 3 layers overlap before you clear it off for the next coil, or it has about a 2 to 3 overlap. Makes it for a strong joint. Not much variance, but there's a little.
Mm-hmm.
Getting kind of floppy.
Now, is this a different pinch here?
Yeah.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. This is one of those 2 steppers?
Yep, it's a dragging pillow. This is basically the Eldon.
Roger Door's dragging pillow style?
He does it with his finger. I do it with
He
my
does
thumb.
it different, huh? Interesting.
He does it with his finger. I do it with my thumb.
Yeah,
Chain.
that's cool.
So the key here is to leave a ridge. You still want to pinch it out to the knife's edge. It just takes 2 steps instead of 1. And you're coming back and you're dragging, sometimes you drag that pillow almost half an inch.
Wow.
Interesting thing, you know, as far as joints go, as the prehistoric people, and putting on handles and things like that, they riveted things. So they poked a hole in the pot and stuck their handle through and smeared it off on the inside. It's kind of like sticking your hand in a hole and closing your fist. It's really hard to pull it out. Really a tight fit, and some of this stuff requires it because the clays that we're using is not as strong as stoneware type clay that's fired at extremely high temperatures. So they're you have to get all the the best shot you can get, and you know, you can't have any faults in it, so riveting it is a really good way to
So some of these pots over here have handles. You usually do that rivet?
I do the rivet on some of the, if they're on the rim, I rivet the rim for sure, and sometimes on the corrugated ones I will rivet them. Like on a little canteen that you can't reach in, when you put the handles on, or the little lugs, I just make sure I stir that clay into the wall. You just can't just daub it on there and expect it to hold.
Right.
Modern ceramics, you know, they can put slip on it, stick it on there, and it'll hold, because they glaze it, and they're actually depending on the glaze to kind of hold it together. But with this stuff, you really have to mix it in really well. So my understanding is this is pretty localized to Eldon Pueblo and Walnut Canyon. Here, straight across, straight across, straight across, middle, 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 and middle. So, those are my marking points. So this is where I put a design. So I put a dent there, go to my next one, put a dent there.
You bought something and left it in town?
I left the ice.
Huh?
There, 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 and there. So I've got my spaced marks. So that's one pinch at that mark. So I'm going to come back wherever I left my coils off and put this coil on. And when I pass up that mark, I go 2. 1, 2. Flat coil. One, 2.
I went for a little walk with David Holiday this morning. It was pretty hard for me to keep up with him. I said, this is really making me mad, David, because you're older than I am.
Where did he take you today?
Oh, I was hunting turkeys, and so we was just walking up and down the creek there.
Okay. Did you find any turkeys?
Found a hen is all. And
So-
some kind of a pill.
1, 2, 3,
Not from asbestos,
4, 5, 6.
No,
Nice.
By the time I come here, that'll be close.
Years ago.
Then you'd start with 1,
Kidney and stuff out of me.
and then 2,
When
3,
they'd done
and
that,
it
there was
ends up
spots on my
being
lungs, but they
triangles
didn't
over the whole
know.
pot.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I got my start, was in basically living in a country where, you know, there was Pueblo dwellings everywhere and looking at sherds and just kind of wondering, you know, I lived in a town where basically built on top of a Pueblo settlement and archaic settlement, and you know, been probably occupied for 7,000-8,000 years. So a lot of history there. We used to find arrowheads in the irrigation ditches and pieces of pottery, and it was just always an interest to me to replicate it. But you know, I started out oxidizing. That was I didn't really understand reduction. I did, but I didn't understand how to do it in a primitive type of kiln or things like that. So that came about slowly. Well, it's a good thing we're going to finish this off because it's getting dry.
Yeah.
The old sun has really taken a toll on it. A lot of times I'll just come back and I'll look at the profile.
Uh-huh.
Push it in, pull it out. It's in too far there. I'm going to be pushing that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Got this lump right here. Interesting thing about corrugated is some of these bigger ones, they were handled so much during the making processes. Sometimes this bottom gets obliterated.
Yep.
And polished. This one hasn't done it much because it dried out really fast.
I hope you enjoyed learning from and about John Olsen. If you'd like to learn more from John, he does teach workshops, and I'll put a link to where you can learn about that down in the doobly-doo. If you want to see another video where I'm interviewing a legend in pottery replication, check out this one over here. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.